You're listening to Artistic Finance, show 149. Today's show is a broadcast of the Financial Independence Club, brought to you in collaboration with Utopia Dreamscape. We discuss The Dirtbag's Guide to Life by Tim Mathis, presented by the author himself. We discuss simplicity, cool begets cool, living on the bare minimum, taking a gap month off of work, the obligation for dirtbags to travel and explore, and social norms that you are not obligated to uphold. Things like reaching a certain financial status or being tied to one place for your entire life. Without further ado, let's get to the show.
You are listening to Artistic Finance, where we help creatives learn about the business of show business.
Welcome and thank you for being here for the May Financial Independence Book Club. And this is the place that we learn things like put your savings into a high yield savings account. AKA, I learned that. Also, we learned things like if you're in the stock market, maybe low fee index funds are the way to go. And today we're going to be learning how to be a dirtbag. Today we are rebranding this Financial Independence Book Club into the Financial Independence Club. And that's because books can't contain us. They can't contain this knowledge. So this is all just a semantic thing a little bit. But if you stop seeing us use the word book, that's why. And speaking of this book club, here is the creator, the original creator of the club, the delightful, the lovely Amy Deluxe.
Thank you. What a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. Yes, as Ethan said, we're rebranding because we don't want while education and reading is a big part of this, and we will continue to read books, we don't want it to be a barrier of entry for anyone. So whether or not you've read the book, you can listen, you can join in, you can learn. Reading is fundamental, but it is also optional. So you can now be part of the Financial Independence Club or the FI Club, however you like to call it, moving forward. One thing that hasn't changed is our vision and our mission. So our vision is financial literacy for creatives. Our mission is to create a transparent forum and inclusive community to propel creatives and arts workers into financial security. So everyone deserves prosperity. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to Tim, especially our host and the writer of The Dirtbag's Guide to Life. So I would like to just introduce you in one way of saying that for me, I had gone through several years where I wasn't reading and I was really sad about it. And so last year I started a challenge where I was making myself read at least a book a month. It ended up turning into the Financial Independence Book Club. And then this year I doubled that challenge by giving myself the homework of reading one financial independence book per month and also reading a book that was not a finance book each month, just to keep things fluid there. And so it was actually my non-FI book when I picked out The Dirtbag's Guide to Life, but then was pleasantly surprised that there was a lot of FI nuggets in there. And so I was posting about it on my Instagram at Utopia Dreamscape. And then I was tagging Tim. I did not know Tim at the time, but then we started chatting and kind of getting a little bit deeper into some of the, non-traditional financial principles, which we'll get in during this session as well. So I'm very excited to have the author here. Thank you, Tim, for joining us. And please jump on in, introduce yourself and say hello.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I was trying to remember the exact order of process of how we met. I remembered you'd posted something from the book, so I immediately predatorily jumped on and was like, "Oh, she's got a podcast. I should be on that." But you're totally right. I'm glad that I kind of tricked you with the title into reading a book that it's not a FI book specifically, but it's a lot about money finances, and it sort of incorporates that in a big sort of way. I'll tell a few stories about myself, so I won't do too sort of intense introduction, but just for a little brief introduction about myself. I am, as you said, I'm an author. I've written this book, The Dirtbag's Guide to Life. I've written another book that is kind of a memoir about leaving religion. So a totally different topic. But mostly now I'm trying to write in like travel and adventure. And that's really kind of what I care about and I'm focused on at the moment. I'm working on a couple other projects around the Camino and around sort of pilgrimage as a concept. And if you want to find me online, I write regularly. I post at least every couple weeks on timmathiswrites.com. So there's my there's my shameless plug. I'm also a psychiatric nurse. I do that part-time. That's how I make most of my money. I've done a ton of traveling. Mostly, I would say my main homes are like the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle, Tacoma area, and then also New Zealand. And I'm from Ohio originally, so I have these sort of roots in those three places, I would say. And yeah, so I drift around a lot. So that's part of what I write about.
That reminds me, before we get too far into it, we probably should define dirtbag for this audience, because we mostly have theater people, production people, lighting people, and I read the book because I am a dirtbag. I'm a trail runner. I'm a van lifer. So, that's what naturally drew me to that. But not everyone in this audience would actually know like the term dirtbag, how we use it. So do you want to explain?
That's a good place to start. So for those of you who are out there who aren't sort of familiar with the sort of concept of a dirtbag, it's, like obviously the term originally was like a bad person, right? Basically dirtbag means like a bad person. But in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, there were these climbers basically who went and sort of posted up at Yosemite and just spent all their time climbing and sort of scrounging for money wherever they could and focused their whole life on climbing. And it's not entirely clear who coined the term, but somebody at some point who was like probably writing a magazine article or something like that called those people a bunch of dirtbags. And they sort of latched onto it and sort of took it on as a badge of honor. And it sort of spread in the outdoor community as this term that refers to people who've like sort of centered their life on the outdoors and are, sacrificing the normal things like a career or a family or a house or whatever, at least for a period of time to go like pursue their outdoor passion. This is the Artistic Finance Book Club, but I actually think there's a huge overlap in this community, both like actually because there's a lot of artists and there's a lot of creatives who do this sort of thing, but also just sort of functionally because these types of people have to kind of pursue the same types of life strategies and financial strategies in order to make it happen. Is that a good answer?
That was a very good answer because I'm not a dirtbagger or familiar with the dirtbagging other than this book. I also agree that there's a lot of overlap, especially because like going to gig, like I've only freelanced my whole life. Even now I don't have work like next week. So like, will work materialize? Will I not? And then traveling, like my next like 6 weeks are going to be traveling for work with my son and with my wife, because she can work remotely. So that's good. Maybe I'm more of a dirtbag than I thought.
Yeah, it's a thing, right? Like it overlaps a lot with sort of the international backpacking community the sort of international like digital nomad community. There's a lot of similarities in those groups. So the book in brief summary is a way to like, I'm trying to define that community, but it's like self-help basically. It's like self-help for how you can live that sort of lifestyle. In really brief, and it would have been late 2016, maybe early 2017, my wife and I were sitting on this bus in Mexico. We had just come off of about a year and a half where we essentially hadn't worked. We started the sort of whole experience with hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, which took us about 5 months. And then we sort of drifted around a little bit and we did do a couple travel nursing type contracts. And then we lived in Las Vegas because my mom and sister are there. So we spent some time in Las Vegas. Then we spent like 4 months in Latin America. Then we spent like 4 months drifting around sort of the Western US. And then we sort of capped it all off with this trip to Mexico. And we're sitting on the bus just sort of thinking about what the year had been and thinking about how we'd gotten to that point. And we were talking about how Even a few years prior to that, we wouldn't have believed that it was possible for us to do that sort of thing. It would have been possible for us to, go that long without working, to do all this cool stuff and to be able to afford it and to really prioritize those things in our life. And then we started to talk about kind of where we'd come from. I'm originally from small town Ohio. I grew up in the same town that the book Hillbilly Elegy is about. So it sort of gives you a flavor, right? Like it's this picture of like declining industrial small town America. Like that's totally where I grew up. Yeah, my grandparents worked at the same factory as the author's grandparents and that sort of thing. So we grew up, both my wife and I grew up very sort of humble circumstances. Always just sort of assumed that life was going to be, working 50 weeks a year. And if we're lucky, get a couple weeks off, retire at 65 if we're lucky, and then die. Right. Like, so that was always sort of the picture of life. And that was sort of always, it's just the culture where we grew up, but it somehow didn't shake out that way for us. We got to this point and we're sitting on this bus in Mexico and looking back on it and thinking like, okay, so there's a good book in there, right? Like there's a good story in there about how we moved from this point of basically not seeing a real path outside of like the traditional work path to being able to actually do it. So we initially started sort of jotting out some ideas like, well, how did we do this, right? Like, how did this end up happening? And we started to jot down things that some of them were about money. Like some of them were like, okay, so how do we pull this off financially? But then also there was a lot of it that was about sort of the decisions we'd made in life, about like what to prioritize, the kind of relationships we built, the kind of career paths we pursued, because one of the key things that happened sort of after we turned 30 is we had both established these very independent career paths as nurses where we could kind of come and go from our jobs as we pleased, which gave us this sort of sense of freedom. We focused on kind of the way we prioritized paying down debts, the way we prioritized investing, the way we prioritized doing the things that we wanted to do and figuring it out. So that's kind of where the book came from. And it developed into this thing about being a dirtbag, basically, because it like clicked at some point that this is like a whole subculture that does this, right? Like, and a whole lot of what we were doing, we picked up along the way from like trail runners. We were in Seattle. And so just in the Seattle outdoor community, through hikers, climbers, all these sorts of people we hung around who were living these sorts of lifestyles. And we'd sort of picked it up and applied it and done a lot of that stuff ourselves. That was what sort of clicked, that this is more than just a thing that we had done, that something, our cool experience, but it was like, this is a communal experience. The core thing I think that we got to was that early in our life, in our early 20s, my wife and I got married super young. Again, typical like small town, Midwesterners. We got married when we were 22. We started dating when we were 18. So we've been together forever at this point. It's been like 25 years. But in our early 20s, we just started to prioritize doing the things that we wanted to do and figuring out how to do it. Part of that was about like money, right? Like part of it was about figuring out how to afford it. But part of it was just about, okay, so what are the things we're going to prioritize in life? And that's really what led us down that path. The basic dirtbag life approach, I would say, you figure out what you want to do. You like look at the resources you've got and you figure it out, right? That seems pretty basic. It seems pretty straightforward, right? Like I'm just saying, like, isn't that what everybody does? But I actually don't think it is. I think a lot of times they kind of put the cart before the horse, or they misprioritize or something, and they focus on building a certain amount of money, or like focus on income itself as the goal. But actually the goal is not the income, right? The goal is what you want to do with your money. The goal is what you want to achieve in life. That's one of the reasons I think that the Dirtbags Guide resonates with people who aren't into the outdoors, right? Like it's really about like, how do you prioritize doing the things that you want to do in life, right?
That was kind of one of the things that surprised me when I literally just picked it up for the title, but the very first chapter is called Money. And then the second chapter is career. And then the third chapter is responsibilities. And then in retrospect, I was like, of course, it's a guide to life. Of course, it has to hold these topics. To your point, where it seems like these are really simple concepts, but in our society and America and capitalism, and we're focused on the money, we're focused on, and then we also have credit cards, and people think debt is a way of life. That's literally a phrase a lot of people say, oh, debt's just a way of life. And their 20% credit cards are just racking up compound interest.
No, our first book club, we spent half the time talking about credit cards debt, which is like my least favorite thing to talk about. But anyway, so like even here where I am annoyed by it.
It makes sense when you don't have enough money to do the things you want to. It's easy to obsess about money, right? Like, because you're like, that's the whole problem, is that I don't have enough money to do what I want, or I can't figure out how to manage my money in a way that'll let me do what I want. So, you can see why people get obsessed with it, and you can see like why, I don't want to talk about debt that much, but it's, you can see why people take it out, because it's a quick and easy way to get to that thing that you want, right? Like whether that's travel or a new house or a new car or education or whatever it might be. But all of I think it's all a trap if you let your focus switch to finances at the expense of what the goal of, financial independence or whatever you want to call it is, right? I wanted to talk a little bit about my money story as well, to give a sense of where I'm coming from as well. And I'll try and keep this relatively brief. But the basic thing is like we started out from zero. We started out from below zero. We got, like I said, we got married at 22. We had both just graduated from college. This is nothing nowadays, but I think between us we had like $50,000 in university debt. And after that, I think we just basically decided that we weren't gonna pile more debt on top of it. So we just basically kept living like we were poor college students. And it's 25 years later, we still haven't really stopped, right? Like we just kind of kept, out of college, working, making more money, but we sort of kept living. We didn't have money. We've never, I don't think I've ever owned a car that's newer than 10 years old, right? We've never taken a loan out for a car. We've always paid cash. We've always, when we did buy property about 5 years after we graduated from college in Seattle, and we bought the cheapest thing we could with the expectation that we were going to fix it up, basically, and see that as an investment and work with it. But other than that, like, we've never really taken on additional debt. We've had a brief period in our 20s when we were really like struggling and scraping to pay our mortgage, and there was a long period of time when we were sort of in that mode of like really focusing on trying to like, how do we get enough money? So we were, working 2 jobs or going to university and working half time at the same time or whatever. So really there was a period where we're scraping, but what happened is just across time, that just general model of like trying to live like people who don't have money while also having an income that we could have afforded to live better, it just all built up. My wife is actually like an excellent financial planner. She actually teaches nurses to do this. She's got her own business called Nurses Investing for Wealth. That's all about like teaching nurses how to invest. So she knows what she's doing, but really like what happened is we got started early and just kept like doing the fundamental stuff, like putting money into investments and saving and not taking on debt. We hit that age 35, I just to flip back to that story about like how we ended up in Mexico, we were both kind of burnt out on work. We were both sort of sick of like the routine, and we were both like really wanted to do something big and cool. And we looked at our finances and realized, like, kind of unintentionally, we'd gotten to the point where it was a very real possibility, especially if we did cheap things, like if we took cheap options. The PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail, you can spend $10,000 in 5 months between 2 people on there. You're not paying for accommodation. You're eating crappy food. It's actually can be dirt cheap. And then when we traveled around Latin America, you can travel in Latin America for a couple $1,000s a month if you really want to, So basically, like, we figured out if we just did cheap stuff, we could like spend a year and a half doing whatever we want, which was awesome, right? Like that's a cool thing to realize at 35. We got no kids, so that helps a lot too. But so basically that's our financial story. And since then it's sort of, as you get older, things just get a bit easier, right? Like, one of the concepts in the book is, it's sort of, to me, is the ideal financial situation. I call it dirtbag rich. There's a lot of different ways to kind of categorize, in the financial independence world, people categorize cappuccino-fi or whatever, barista-fi or whatever, these sort of different types of financial independence. But for me, like, dirtbag rich is a way of saying you have the freedom in your time to do what you want whether that's like, spending your summers through hiking or climbing Yosemite or these big travel or paddling adventures or whatever. You've got the time freedom to do that, but you also have the financial means to be able to make money quickly enough to do that it's not going to stress you out, right? Like, so basically you have a career path or a skill or something that you can sell that you can make money quickly and without a ton of stress, and do it in a way that you don't hate. And then you can use that to basically buy yourself time freedom. Been talking to one of my friends about this concept, and I think there's sort of like this holy trinity thing that people are aiming for, which is high time freedom, high sense of meaning and fulfillment, and high income potential, right? Like the ability to make money quickly doing something that you don't hate. And so to me, that's the ideal financial situation to be in. The goal isn't to not work ever again, or it's not to like not do anything meaningful ever again, obviously, right? Or anything productive. It's just to be able to be in a situation where you don't have to like feel controlled by your work. You don't have to feel like you have to do things that you don't want to do. That's what this is all about, right? Is freedom. I'm 43 now, and unless something really weird happens, we're sort of gonna be in that phase for the rest of our life. We're nurses. I mean, nursing is a hard job, but it's a lot easier when you can do it whenever you want. You don't have to go in, when you don't want to. The other positive thing about nursing, and these are the types of careers that, like, I talk about these sorts of things and these types of careers in the book. The other thing about nursing is that it's a huge demand. So I'm a mental health nurse. I can like literally work whenever I want to. If it really comes down to it, I can have a full-time job in the next week, no problem. Or I could work casually and pick up shifts whenever and wherever I want. My wife's in the exact same boat. So we've got this huge like sense of stability in our careers because of that. And across time, because it pays well enough, and especially as you get some experience, you can make enough to live on relatively quickly. So those are some of the concepts in the book. I've got some other points, but I'm gonna let you guys ask some questions or just hear your thoughts, because I always get like sick of hearing my own voice.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I like that you talk about in the book too, and to what you're talking about now, is you say making your career like a means to an end, secondary to exploration or whatever it is that you're personally pursuing. I think a lot of people will go on these spurts. Like you said, you can make that money quickly for short periods of time. So you can go as a nurse and you can get a contract for a month or 3 and then take off again. We can also do that as freelance lighting designers, and there's different careers that can do that, where you can take off swaths of time. So I did really appreciate seeing it from that perspective. I do want to kind of hear, because I think that there's a lot of agreement to that in this room, from conversations I've had with you both. I mean, we are all, I still, as an abundance thinker and a wildly free person, I still have my moments of scarcity too, because we are just so ingrained with like, you have to make money, you have to work, you have to put your career first. So for people that maybe don't break away from that normative kind of thinking as easily, what does it take for someone to really kind of break the chains, I guess? How do you cross over? Because it's that first leap is so hard,
The first thing I would say in there is that, like, as someone who was raised in a sort of a community where most people were doing factory labor, were doing retail, customer service, it comes very naturally to think of work as a means to an end. Like most people hated their jobs where I grew up, and I think most people do, right? like just in general, at some point it breaks them. So like that was one thing I would say, is like I've always had this sense of work as like a means to an end, which is good, kind of, because it sets you up to think of it in a different, like this. I'm not pursuing my dreams through my work necessarily. That's something else, right? So there is a mindset thing to it. Like sometimes it's as concrete as sitting down and being like, what do I actually want to accomplish in life, right? Like you've got a limited amount of time. And so like sitting down and concretely thinking about it can be sort of that first step, and it can sort of like, I guess, shift your mindset a little bit. The more negative way of framing this is that, like, as a nursing is a freaking hard job. between 22 and 35, we were in that exact same, I don't know if it was career, I don't say we were career focused, but we didn't feel like it was going to be an option to like not be working full time, or not be working in a stable, solid, well-paying job. Like that was always, there's always an anxiety about that initially, right? Like of not having sort of a contract or and I think that is a huge thing for us. We burn ourselves out. And so it was like, it's sort of a force out that we started to be like, oh God, like I can't keep doing this. And so then you start to look at it and be like, oh, I don't actually have to. So that was like, for us, that was kind of the process, which is probably not the ideal process that I would recommend to people. There's huge value, I guess, in again, identifying what you want to do, but also identifying what you need. One of the big gifts of like when we burn out going on a through hike, what happens on a through hike is you spend 5 months living out of a backpack and you essentially get used to the fact that actually like I'm not any less happy than when I like had my house full of crap and all my stuff, and I almost like even forget that I have that stuff. Like you go back home and you're like, oh, I hadn't even thought about this in months. So there's like a real gift in doing something to recognize what you actually need to be happy, and that can help you to prioritize like, okay, so can I survive on less than I currently am? If so, what's that mean for my future? There are people for whom like work is sort of their core identity and those sorts of things, and it's great, and they don't want to not work, or they don't want to not go to their jobs or whatever. But I think there's a lot of people where that's not the case, and I think you have to identify what your actual core identity is. Another thing I would just to toss in, huge proponent of just take a month off, right? Like this is a thing that Angel and I talked about too, is like the first thing that sent us down this track was we went on the Camino de Santiago, and it took us about a month. We didn't quit our jobs to do it. We just took the time off and went and did it. It wasn't exactly on a whim, but it was because our friends had invited us because they were going to do it after their, we kind of crashed their honeymoon a little bit because it was their, after they got married, they went and did the Camino, and we're like, oh, we could totally figure that out. So we went and did that, and it like, that process of having time away, even like, it doesn't have to be a ton of time, but I think it has to be sort of significant enough that you start to forget like what life was like back home. If you can take a month and just get away from your situation, if you're like genuinely stuck in a rut, it's like, it does wonders for helping you picture what life could look like if it was, if you weren't in the same routine that you're in at the moment. So that's my plug for pilgrimage and a month-long trip.
I like that. And also just because the last month or so, I've sort of taken time off, but just because I had a son. But like, it was sort of on a whim, sort of not. I don't know. You decide. But like that has made us sort of just reflect and pause, be like, because me, it's like, well, I really haven't worked for a month. And it's like, whoa. And, I'm a freelancer, so it's not like I get paternity leave or parental leave or anything like that. And then moving forward, we're going to be leaving New York. I feel like it's the same thing as like, yeah, it's not going to Spain or going wherever, but it does make you pause and reflect. And I also want to say, Tim, really love the book. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for putting it into our lives. Because when Amy first suggested it, I was like, I don't go hiking. I don't go backpacking. I've never camped. I never intend to camp for the rest of my life. And then I start reading it, and it's talking about like oatmeal with mealworms in it. And I'm like, what? Oh my gosh, is this? But like Amy, I was surprised that like, yeah, it's a guide to life. And actually, I really liked it. And actually, some of the stuff I connected to was that I was raised very religiously. At some point, I honestly thought I was going to become a pastor or a minister or something like that. So I resonated that. And what I liked also was that you got to these like morals or these responsibilities, you called them, like, what is the dirtbag's responsibility? And another thing that helped me get into it is I don't know if you guys know about the lie flat movement, which is sort of like comes out of China, and it's really just about like not overworking yourself. Like, no, I'm not going to identify with my work. Like, I'm not going to work. I'm not going to push myself. Me not being a dirtbagger, at least at first, I got into it because I was like, oh yeah, this is basically saying like, it doesn't have to be this way. And I just want to point out something, like I'm actually now just reading my notes. I took all these notes. But I love that you wrote, the dirtbag mindset on money has evolved from, I guess I'll eat cat food for dinner because I bought all the gear and then I only have 49 cents left to my name, to hell yeah, I'm going to eat cat food because I don't need the fancy people food. which I just love, because it is just like, yeah, like, what do you actually need? Like, why are you going to work all the time? Like, why do we, even on this call, I was like, oh, I don't have work next week. And so clearly there's part of me that identifies with, like, I need to be working. And if I'm not working, like, what's up with that? I really like the responsibilities. And if you don't mind, I'm going to find my notes and I'm going to read the responsibilities. And this is actually, like, in my life, coming from, like, an argument of, like, if you're not religious, how do you know not to murder people? Or, like, how do you know to be a good person? And I'm always just like, really? Like, really? We need, like, some sort of layer? Anyway, okay, so here are the dirtbag responsibilities. Environmentalism, rehumanization in the face of technological advance, open your eyes to natural technology in the natural world surrounding us, simplicity, and humanism. You have the responsibility to protect other humans. And I just like these responsibilities because you're also layering in, it's not about not doing anything. It's not about being productive or being a part of the world. We're still part of the world, but we're just not doing it maybe the way that we're used to.
When we were on that Mexico trip, a part of the experience when we were sitting on that bus was, we've been doing this for a year and a half, and I'm actually pretty bored. I feel like we've been just, like, walking around looking at things. Like, we've done all this amazing stuff, but I've spent the last year and a half basically just walking around looking at things. I need to do something meaningful, right? Like, and after that, I, like, went back to working more and, like, focusing more on writing. It's sort of like a productive thing that I always wanted to do that I found meaningful. The thing is like, when you, and this is one of the things that's maybe relevant to that sort of, like, by conversation about, like, well, you just save all your money and then you're going to be free. But actually, when you get there, you're not actually free, because you're like, oh, actually, I still need to do something with my life that makes me, like, feel like I'm a productive member of society and that I'm a responsible human being. And so that was, for me, it was important when I was writing the book that was, like, a big part of the message, right? Is that this isn't just about, like, doing whatever you want, right? Like, that's not the point. Like, the point is, like, how do you sort of find a path to become a good human being, right? Like, and so it is, like, again, coming from a religious background, don't tell anyone, but I was kind of like writing a Bible for people, right? like it's.
I saw it. I saw right through you, Tim. I needed the Bible. I'm a disciple.
Yeah. Totally. So I started a cult, but no, I was basically, you're recognizing that, like, subcultures form, and, like, this sort of outdoor dirtbag thing is a subculture of people who do this sort of thing, and they form around values a lot of times, right? Like, it's not just about sort of an activity or clothes they wear or whatever. They're formed around values, and that's part of what I was trying to capture. Subcultures form as sort of a, like, critique of the larger culture, right? Like, that's why they happen. And so I think that there is really kind of what you pointed out. There's universal, valuable stuff in it, that the hook is that it's like, the book is meant to help people live an adventurous life on the cheap, right? Like, that's kind of the hook of the book. But the sort of bigger picture is there's actually, like, important stuff within the subculture that helps people to identify things like, well, what does actually matter in life? Like, what should you actually do? Like, you talk about responsibilities, and I think it's a huge thing that it's your responsibility to, like, spend your whole life working as hard as you possibly can. And probably, like, you need to, like, both do that and figure out how to save the world at the same time, because, like, individuals are supposed to solve all the world's problems. But then, like, at some point it hits you, like, this is not helping anyone, right? It's, like, just grinding the planet into the ground. It's grinding people into the ground. It's, like, super, super dysfunctional. You have to, I think at some point, all of us, and, you had a kid, maybe that's part of the driver too, but at some point everybody starts to question those, like, well, actually, hold on, is this actually what I should do? Is this actually, like, because responsibility is something that you're, like, it's what you should do, right? Like, that's kind of how you define it. Or something you're responsible for. Like, you own it, you made a commitment, and you should follow it through.
On the flip side of responsible, you had written things that dirtbags are not responsible for, which I think is also a valuable thing. So I wrote them down, so I'm just going to read them. You're not responsible to achieve any standard of housing or work or financial status. You're not responsible to be tied to one place for your lifetime. You're not responsible to spend your life suffering to be productive. You're not responsible to spend your life making money for someone else. You're not responsible to have a nice car or clothes. You're definitely not responsible to go into debt or work overtime to buy crap that you don't need or want. Which I think we can all get on board with these things. And I think it's really good that they're written down here. So then maybe I should put this plaster to the wall or something to remind myself. These are all things that you've mentioned already, but it's true. It's like, we don't need this. Like, why do we need what we need?
When you were talking about the growing up around everyone's doing factory work and everything, it reminded me, I went into the Wayback Machine of one of my very first dirtbag experiences when I was 21, I think. I literally had nothing. I have a very broken background in my childhood and have been surviving on my own since I was about 6 years old. But I was a happy little creative starving artist, and I had $20 to my name. I went up to a rainbow gathering in Vermont, and then I found out there was a national one all the way over in Oregon. And I had never left Philadelphia, really. I was like, cool, let's hitchhike. And I hitchhiked all the way from Vermont to Oregon with $20 to my name. And somehow it magically worked out. People were like, oh, kid, giving me money. People giving money to me, buying me a sandwich. After the gathering, we found out about a squat in Portland. And so we went and stayed at the squat. And then I got a factory job on the night shift where it was like a magazine factory. And for 4 hours, I would just stack papers into the machine that was whizzing by, and you couldn't stop. You couldn't miss it. And then you'd get a coffee break where you get a coffee out of the machine. And then you go back to 4 hours feeding the thing. And I did that for 2 weeks so that I would have enough money to continue hitchhiking down the West Coast. Completely irresponsible, right? But all I knew was that I wanted to go see what the West Coast was like, right? And so the factory thing was what made me trigger it. But also, it is that thing where it's do what you want and figure out the money, and then you'll figure out the money. You'll figure out how to survive. That's a little of an extreme example. I was very young, and I probably wouldn't exactly do that again right now, but there's a middle ground.
You can't live your whole life that way, but you can live a couple months that way, right? Which is big, right? Two things. One is I had exactly that same job in Ohio where I fed paper into a machine over and over. I lasted a month, and it was did you get all paper cuts all the time?
Yeah, and also my arms were tired.
It was so it's the worst job I've ever had, because it was it was giving yourself paper cuts for $12 an hour or something like that, at a pace that you can't. Yeah. Anyway, so there was that. And then the other bit of it is exactly that point of there's definitely something to starting with what you've got. I got $20. What can I make happen with $20? Versus starting with to get to the West Coast, it costs $150 on a bus, or, $350 on a plane. Instead of being this is how much it costs, starting with this is how much I have, I'm going to see what I can do with it. That is definitely a thing that it's a lot easier when you're young, but it's a good attitude to keep through life, I think, because you can accomplish a lot.
I still travel on a shoestring by choice. And, a lot of people, and I travel a lot, and a lot of people just don't understand how I travel so much, but I'm not staying at the really, fancy resorts.
If you're couch surfing and staying in hostels and cooking your own food, you can, that's one of the things, right? It's all about figuring out what you can accomplish on the budget you've got. Or, again, it gets back to what's important to you. The important thing to you is going and seeing this new part of the world or whatever. It's not going and staying in the resort and spending a ton of money. So just don't do that. Just don't do the expensive stuff. Do the cheap stuff. And
it gets me further. I mean, no shade on people that like resorts, but
I mean, there's nothing
so
wrong with
much
it, but
more because I don't have to spend $20,000 on one trip.
Yeah, exactly. And it's again about identifying your value.
Wait, I just want to say, because Nicole and I like to travel, or before we had a kid, we did. And we're going to get back to it. We're going to get back to it when he gets a passport. But we like really prioritize travel in our life. The first 10 years of our marriage, we took, I would say, like more trips than other people, but we didn't do it a dirtbag way. Like we've never even done an Airbnb. Like we like having somebody there 24 hours a day that like, if we had a question, we could ask them, like our front desk. In the book, you said, the first price you see online is very often like not the lowest price, but it's that thing of start with like, what do you want to do? Like, okay, we want to go to China. Okay. So like look it up and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is going to be such an expensive trip. But then you just continue on. Like you look for, okay, how can I get to China? Like, is there another way other than this round trip airfare? Is there a different airline? We don't go on like a shoestring, I guess. Like trips do cost like 3,000 to 5,000 probably, but we're going to Africa or we're going to Asia and there's a way to do it. And I remember once we went on a trip and it was like a week and a half and we came back and we told somebody what we spent on it and they were like, well, did you eat food? And we were like, yes, we did. But it's like, if you want to do something, you can find a way. Like you don't have to go with just what the expectation is. So I'm only saying that because while I'm not a dirtbag, Nicole and I like also travel like modestly, I would say, and we're able to do a lot. So we're like a halfway ground here.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think it's stuff that a lot of people have picked up across the last, I mean, the internet's been great for helping people realize the possibilities that are out there in life, because you can easily find other people's stories about how they pulled these things off and that sort of thing. One of the things I've been doing all this like research and writing about, like pilgrimage is sort of a classic concept, like, going towards somewhere important for some life transformation or something like that. So I've been doing a bunch of reading on that recently. And, the most classic way to travel is like pilgrimage. Basically, it's to walk out your door, walk towards somewhere, and then when you get there to walk back. And it's like, it's actually a dirt cheap way to travel that also like, and the reason it's like people have kept doing it is because it like changes their lives, right? Like it's one of the most meaningful things you can do, just to like walk out your door and walk to a different city and then walk back, right? Like it's a weird, super weird thing, but it's like sort of the essence of what hooks people into travel anyway. So I mean, that's, you couch surf, you use like warm showers, you use like buses, you use whatever, and you can have a very like transformative travel experience. People did this as paupers in the Middle Ages, right? Like, so we can figure out how to do it now, right?
That's amazing. Can I circle back just because I love the religious things? But there's like the golden rule, which is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But you have a golden rule for dirtbags.
Yeah, so I kind of, like in every chapter, I identified like golden rules on the specific chapter heading.
Well, okay, actually, I should have clarified. My favorite was the cool begets cool.
Oh, yeah. The thing around like, I talk about relationships and sort of how the people you surround yourself with, and you guys, like the artistic community will totally resonate with this. I think the people you surround yourself with really determine the way you shape your life. If you like go do cool things, like if you just do something weird, like if you were to, just pick some odd thing, you're going to run into somebody along the way who also is doing something odd or is going to be inspired by the odd thing you're doing. And it's like, oh, dude, my friend did this. You should be in contact with them. And then they'll connect you with like somebody else who's done something weird. And that'll give you a new idea that like, oh, I could do that too. And so eventually what happens is like, if you do interesting stuff, you become an interesting person and you meet other interesting people, and it all sort of like exponentially multiplies. So I think that that's like a huge reason to do the things that you dream about, right? Because eventually like it's going to make it so that you're surrounded by other people who are also doing the same sorts of things, and it's just going to, steamroll from there. So yeah, that's the golden rule around relationships.
It's just my favorite, like that's my new rule in life is like cool begets cool. We've never called ourselves cool, but that's all right. But also you had said kids are like the ultimate opportunity to put the cool begets cool principle into action, because cool parents are going to beget cool kids. Nicole and I are like, well, we better have a cool kid. Like this guy's going to reflect on us.
Kids are a roll of the dice, but like, the best chances, if you want your kid to be cool and have cool interests, do cool things yourself, and they'll pick up on it. And I'm not a parent. That's an area of the book that I'm always like, it would be a lot stronger if I had somebody who was a parent who'd done this sort of stuff to give some input. But I do think that that's true. I think that I'm not like overstepping my bounds by saying that, but I think that's true.
I totally think it's great. I also think, because I always like to simplify things. I know that there's a lot of nuance in life and complexities and all that, but I also think that truth and morality and all this can often boil down to like very simple things, like Wheaton's law of like, don't be a dick is like one of my favorite. How do you not become a Karen, or how do you not murder somebody, or and it's like, just don't be a dick. Like, let's start there. And so cool begets cool is also like that. And it also, to me, connects to other people, like rugged individualism that America has of like, we do everything for ourselves. We don't need any help, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no. Cool begets cool. You need people around you. You need the connections.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, this is maybe a sidetrack, but my whole sort of immersion in the outdoor world started when we moved to New Zealand when we were 23. We went to New Zealand and studied and worked. This is a whole sort of goes right back to Amy's point of like, you just move somewhere and work there and you can have the adventure of a lifetime, right? Like so that's what we did when we were 23. And my whole immersion in the outdoor community was there. And New Zealand is very much like a communal culture. From the beginning, the outdoors for me, that sort of like rugged individualism is sort of rubbed, which is very much a part of American outdoor culture. But it's always rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. And I think it's like not quite accurate because you don't actually do any of this stuff on your own, right? Like even like, Chris McCandless, like Into the Wild was like drawing on lots of other people's resources to go do his crazy stuff in the wilderness or whatever. So no, I'm glad that that resonated, because I think to me it's like really important principle too, is like that this is about like the community, right? Like it's about building community. And
yeah, because like at the same time you're saying, you don't have to play by the norms. You don't have to partake in nice clothes or a nice car, or like you don't have to do these things. Like it's just in your imagination that you need to do such a thing. So in a way, it's like withdrawing from people and society in like one sense. But on the flip side, it's like every part of being dirtbag relies on other people, because it's like, oh, go do this job for a little bit of time. Well, you have to have a whole other structure and for the job to exist. Or to take a bus somewhere, there has to be somebody to make the bus, somebody to make the road, somebody to drive the bus,
right?
Like all that. So it's like, it's complete community, like 100%.
And I mean, to that point, it's the things that we do that we don't make money at that already drive those relationships. So that's why when people volunteer, or you do something for your neighbor, or you just hang out with your friends, like none of that is you're not getting money for any of that, right? And we draw so much more meaning, and we really connect with people because that filter of money isn't kind of dirtying things up. Obviously, I'm a proponent of wealth building as well, but it can also very much get in the way if it's your only focus and your only goal, and it is not value-based. It can really detract from what's really important.
Yeah, it's the means to an end thing, right? Like, keeping your sort of sense that it's wealth building is important, and came from a background where you didn't have money. Like it's very important, right? Like if you understand what it's like to be in that situation, you know that it is very important, but also it's important for specific reasons, right? Like it's not important, and it's money's just this made up weird concept, but it's it's a tool, right? It's a tool to live the life you want. So
wait, I remembered another one of your golden rules, and that was the one for what was it? Responsibilities. And this was exploration is a responsibility, which I love.
This is like a huge place where like there's this huge overlap between like the artistic community you guys are part of and targeting and that sort of thing, and then the sort of outdoor community too, because a lot of times it is really about, in both cases, it's about sort of like figuring out what the world is about, figuring out like learning and growing and communicating and having adventures and all these sorts of things is a very much like part of the like reason people do art, as well as the reason people like go on adventures, I think, right? Like it's all sort of this means of exploration. I was talking to somebody about this recently, actually, about how adventure is it just a waste of time? Is it like am I just like being super selfish? And like, I don't think so. I mean, I think it can be, just like anything can be. It can be self-indulgent or whatever, but like, I think in the end, it's what you're trying to do is learn things about the world and then report them back and use them to make yourself a better person, and using them to kind of enrich your community, use them as tools to make the world a better place. And that's, to me, that's like what travel's about. That's what like all these sort of outdoor adventures are about. It's also, I mean, I'm a writer. It's as much as I'm sort of into the outdoors, right? I spend more time writing than I do playing outside or whatever. I think they're similar though, right? Like they do a similar function. They're sort of figuring out the constant process of trying to figure out the world.
I mean, I have a, you know, what I always come back to is, as human beings, I think we are all innately creative. Even the sciences and the math. And I mean, just if you look around, like everything in the world that we know is because somebody had an idea and then they made it, they fabricated it, they created it, right? The nature and the exploration, I think, is tapping into the source, because we are earthlings after all. And we've been so, you know, separated from our natural surroundings, and we mostly migrate into major cities and concrete jungle. And so when you get out in nature, you know, it just, you know, kind of deregulates you and gets you grounded, literally. And then that refills the well of creativity, and then we can go back and then we create things and we do the things with our community. And so it's kind of cyclical, I find. And I think it's a natural requirement. I think it's something that is really lacking in kind of modern society, that a lot of people are very disconnected from that exploration and from the natural world. But I think that, you know, from my personal experience and just about everybody that I know that does connect with the world that way, everyone always says it's very rejuvenating, brings the energy back and makes you feel alive again and things like that. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And it's that sense of connection and transcendence and like being connected to something bigger than yourself. Yeah, I think that very much drives creativity. Yeah, Murakami, have you read what I talk about when I talk about running? A very good book on that kind of idea, basically like how he's a runner and a writer, and you can't do one without the other kind of thing. And it's, yeah, I think there's something really true in that. You know, it's classically like people who are creative are also classically frequently like, you know, it's the hippie thing, right? Like they're out in the woods, like hugging trees and then like writing poems about it, right? Like it goes together somehow.
Love a good hug from a tree.
I know Amy's going to try to wrap us up here, but I just want to say one more thing out before we go. You talk about like saying must be nice, and that if you ever say must be nice about something or someone, that really is a bit of jealousy, or it's indicating a little bit of jealousy that there's something that you want really deep down. I just resonated with that because I have that thought sometimes, and then I have to pause. Because also, I don't know, just an example of like Tony Awards. Like right now, the nominations are out, and I'm like, oh, it must be nice for those lighting designers that have Tony nominations. It's like, it's definitely something I want deep down, or not deep down. But it's also like, but if you talk to each and every one, the way they got to that is crazy. And there's no way that I could even do that. Anyway, but it's just a good point of like, anytime you have that thought.
Yeah, or maybe could. And like one of the things it's a gross thought, isn't it? But like one of the things that's important about that, and I think this is like the way I framed it in the book, was when you tag it when you have that thought of like must be nice, instead of asking that, try and switch it to like, how did they do that? Because that's actually a useful thought, right? Because must be nice is not useful. It just is like gross and depressing and kind of obnoxious. But like how did they do that? Then it actually gets you to think like, oh, they did all this stuff. I don't want to do that stuff. That's fine. Or I do want to do that stuff. So I'm going to do that stuff, and I'm going to do what they did too, which is how it works, right? Like that's how you sort of identify mentors sometimes, is like, this person did this thing I really want to do and I'm jealous of. So like, how did they do it? And how can I learn to get there?
Yeah, definitely modeling. Well, Ethan was right. I do have to wrap up, but I want to just ask you one final thing. So it turns out that an AI bot copied your book, because it sounded like you took about a year to write the project. I'm sure the AI bot didn't take that long, but how did you find out, and what's going on with that?
Yeah, so this is like very brave new world. It is true. There are actually 2 robot copies of the Dirtbag's Guide to Life available for sale on Amazon. yeah, it took me about about a year of formal writing to write the project. I'm guessing the AI bots cranked them out in like a couple hours, but essentially I was, as you do, I was like Googling myself. I think I was looking up the book on Goodreads. I like noticed that there was like another book that was like Dirtbag Life Hacks You Need to Know, important long-term rules for hiker trash people who like to ski and travelers, or something, like some like weird like mutant variation on my title. And I was like, what is this? So I like looked it up. Goodreads and Amazon are the same company, right? So like I just linked through the Amazon profile, and they had literally like word for word stolen my book description. They like added some stuff in like a weird, like poor grammar. It's like, it's clearly like English is not their first language kind of thing, but I have no idea who this person is. But they basically like stole my book description. And then like I was like, I really want to read this book now. I like want to buy it and see what it's like, but I'm not going to do that. But I opened up the like preview or whatever, and it was like so weird. It was like the same topics, but like it clearly just been run through Chat GPT and reworded. This is like a whole thing now. Apparently, like there was a Washington Post article about this other guy who'd had a similar experience, but it's just the next iteration of like piracy, right? It used to be that they just kind of like store your PDF and distribute it on Reddit or whatever, which is like, that's more straightforward. I'd rather people did that. Oh, and I found that there was another one that was very similar too. I was like, oh, they've done it two versions. That's cool. But so I like contacted Amazon and told them what had happened, and they essentially told me that they weren't going to take it down because it's not. They'd essentially evaded piracy laws and copyright laws because it wasn't the same text. They're like, people are allowed to write books on the same topic and you can't copyright that. And the wording is different enough. And they've like, it doesn't say the same thing inside. So they've evaded piracy laws. So, so it's kind of crazy, right? These books are like super, I don't know. First of all, I don't know why they stole my book. It's like,
because you're about to be a New York Times bestseller.
I guess so. Because like, I mean, whatever. I mean, I'm not even making money off the book, but I'm sure their pirated copies won't either. But you can see in the future that this is going to be crazy, right? Like, because people are going to be able to basically rewrite. When AI gets better, it's going to be able to like rewrite books in a way that's actually like they're good, right? Like, so, and will compete with the original. It's sort of a weird, brave new world, but
well, for our readers, make sure you get the right one. A Dirtbag's Guide to Life by Tim Mathis.
Yeah, you wouldn't mistake it, because even the authors' names are misspelled. I think the guy's last name is Rodriguez or Rodriguez with an R after it. Like, what in the world? But yeah, no, it's creepy. It's kind of, to me, there's an irony in the fact that the robot stole this book about like getting back to connecting with nature too, right? Like there's some like poetic irony there.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Thank you for sharing. I just thought that was so wild. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. And this was such an incredible conversation. And I'm really glad that we were able to convince my co-host Ethan, because he is not a dirtbag, but he's an aspiring.
But Wheaton's Law, don't be a dick. I was happy to go along. I was happy to go along with it.
Yeah.
Cool. I was cool, and cool begets cool.
Yes. So yeah, great. So we do a monthly prize every month, and we're doing this on a social media giveaway. So whoever leaves their favorite comment on our socials about today's discussion, you are going to win some swag from Artistic Finance. It's going to be anything out of our merch shop. So how you're going to enter is you're going to like the post, which will be posted shortly after this. You're going to follow Artistic Finance, Utopia Dreamscape, and Tim, if you like.
Yep, follow me. Go to my website and sign up for the mailing list, timmathiswrites.com. That's the best. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Dirtbag Guide, singular, Dirtbag Guide.
So yeah, like, follow, and comment, and then we will pick a winner and send you your Artistic Finance swag. So thanks again for everyone for coming out. Ethan, take it away.
All right. So the only thing is that the newsletter. So you can sign up for the Financial Independence Club newsletter, which is written by Utopia Dreamscape and Amy. And you can find that at artisticfinance.com/club, or you can go to the Utopia Dreamscape Instagram, and there's a link in the bio that'll take you to a sign up to get that monthly email that does a summary of this club, and then also a bunch of other financial independence resources. All right, so the next book that we're doing is the Artistic Finance Dirtbag Guide to Life. And it may seem very similar to this month's book, but I assure you that it is completely original. It is not a regurgitated by ChatGPT version of Tim's book. It's totally me. I thought it up completely.
It's going to be so good.
There's going to be a lot of golden rules.
That's it for this week's episode. So what did you think of today's book? Head over to Instagram and leave a comment, which is also the way to win the attendance prize. And actually, truth be told, you can also comment on LinkedIn or on Facebook. Any comment out on the socials will actually make you eligible. Now, next month, we are reading Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva, presented by Natasha Joy D'Souza. Find the date, time, and a Zoom link to the meetup at artisticfinance.com/book club, which I realize is now out of date since it's just the club. But for now, artisticfinance.com/book club. A note for next month's book, we have an affiliate link at bookshop.org who partners with independent and local bookstores. If you don't get the book from the library and you end up purchasing it, please consider doing it via our affiliate link, which you can find at artisticfinance.com/book club or in today's show notes. Now, an update on Nicole and Theo and me. I've had dad brain the last couple months, so I don't know if I've mentioned any of this on the podcast yet. So if it's a shock, I apologize for no warning. But as of this weekend, we have officially moved out of New York City. So on Sunday, we packed everything onto a moving truck, and then we went to the airport and we flew to Missouri. That's where I'm going to be working for the summer. Today, you might have noticed that my sound quality is different than usual, and that's because the microphone is packed up on the truck, which is going to be arriving tomorrow morning. So I'm recording this with headphones. This flight we took was Theo's very first flight, and he did not cry at all. He was a perfect little baby. It was amazing. Now, I did have some struggle with folding the stroller, did the gate check. You're supposed to lock the wheels, and then there's this little thing that holds it folded. Anyway, thankfully, someone figured it out. But other than that, the flight was as smooth as possible. And I like to give a shout out here to my sister, Marissa, who came up a couple days early, helped us pack up, helped us move, helped us on the plane. I honestly don't know how parents do it, and we would not have been able to do it without Marissa. So thank you, Marissa. Now, Nicole is on maternity leave, and so all of us are going to be living in Springfield, Missouri, starting next week. I'm lighting a season of shows at Tent Theater, which is on the campus of Missouri State University. I'll be lighting Anything Goes, Baskerville, which is a Sherlock Holmes mystery comedy play, and The Prom. Now, in the middle of that, we're going to be heading to Ivins, Utah, where I'm going to be lighting Beautiful, the Carole King musical. Nicole and Theo are going there as well. So yeah, anyway, just wanted you all to know it's been a big move for us. We lived in New York for 10 years, and this summer we're sort of becoming nomadic. Now, we're going to be settling down with a new home base in August. We're sorting through those details right now about what we're going to be doing for life and career. But for now, this podcast that has been broadcasting from New York City is today being broadcast from St. Charles, Missouri. And then another thing, today I had a Zoom meeting with former guest of the show, Ronnie Dutra, a director. Now, we're working together to bring a new play off Broadway next year. Now, at the end of the meeting, Ronnie said, either you're really well rested after your move or you're a great actor. So, Ronnie, thank you for that. And if anybody wants to know my actual state of being after the move, just get a hold of Nicole, who took some, let's say, unflattering photos of me when we finally finished up the move and were able to rest for the night. That's it for the updates. If you're still listening, you are a super listener, and I appreciate you being here. If you want to get involved with the podcast that is currently and now broadcasting from St. Charles, Missouri, you can support my work by becoming a patron. Now, patrons get a private podcast feed, and you have a direct messaging line to me. So if you want to join up, it makes a huge difference in the budget. So sign up at patreon.com/artisticfinance. My final note for today is our dad jokes. Now, I asked ChatGPT for some dad jokes about money, and These are the best ones they gave me. These are the best ones. The other ones were so bad, they didn't even make sense. All right, here we go. Why did the man put his money in the oven? Because he wanted to make some hot dough. Why did the pig go to the casino? To play the slot machines. And this one has nothing to do with money. I'm not sure why it's in here. Why did the scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field. That's it for today. Until next time, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance, where we interview successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire the creative community. To access our show notes and resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.